it's not founded at the moment.
Well, Erastus, thanks for these updates, and let's stay on these cases as you always have in the past, and keep our audience updated. Thank you so much. Bless you.
Right.
Okay. Now, Dr. Salasi Adum is a psychiatrist. Stop smiling anymore. Dr. Salasi Adum is a psychiatrist, a child and adolescent mental health specialist at Pantang Hospital, and Doc joins us now. Good morning.
Hello.
There you are. Dr. Salasi Adum, thank you very much for your time with us. We are struggling to understand what must be going through the minds of children who end up being abused by those meant to protect them. But then there's the added burden of the fact that there doesn't seem to be a resolution legally to some of these cases, and these children continue to live on for years knowing that the person who harmed them is walking around free. What does that do to them psychologically?
Good morning to you and your listeners. I think it must be very confusing for children who go through such experiences, because for a child, you look up to all adults for protection, for love, and for care. So it causes a lot of confusion in their minds as they grow up. And also some learned behavior as well. So right from childhood, if a child is being abused, then the child also learns that is the way to go. So some children also exhibit such abusive behavior right from childhood. So you see some of the children being bullies at school, beating other children at school, being very angry and throwing tantrums at the least provocation. So it causes a lot of confusion for the child.
Now, while a court case is going on, I know that here in Ghana, unlike other parts of the world, there aren't special courts, for children where they are allowed to testify, in a protected environment and so forth. So the experience of court, walking into a big room full of adults and being asked to stand in a little box and having a man with a white wig looking down at you and asking you pointed questions, how does that process also go down with children, and does that affect sometimes the process of seeking justice for some of these heinous crimes?
Yes, as you can imagine, it will be very intimidating for a child who is already traumatized. So the best will be to have special courts where the public is not allowed to come in. I think some of the courts are able to do that. I don't know whether all of them do that, but I think some of the courts are able to do that, where they don't have so many people in the courtroom at the time, and the child is given some privacy to be able to speak up. But even with that, it's difficult for a traumatized child to be able to speak up, especially if the person who is accused of the crime is in the room. It will be very intimidating, yeah.
Now, for adults, sometimes we're advised, by mental health professionals that it's good to talk about your problems. It's cathartic. Is that the case for children too, when they are made to recount stories of abuse? Is that helpful to them or harmful?
Well, it depends on the child and also the circumstances of the abuse and also the timing. So it all depends. When the child is assessed and is ready to talk about it, the talking and the guided process may offer some help. But sometimes the child is simply not ready to talk or can't even talk. It's just totally mute and quiet. And in such a case, we have ways of going around assessing the child to be able to know what happened. So if for very young children, for example, we can ask them to draw pictures. And sometimes even during play, as we observe the child with some form of play, we are able to have an idea of what kinds of abuse the child has experienced.
So, if recounting the tale is not automatically helpful, how do you tell? How do you tell whether it's a good time to make a child talk about a trauma or not?
So you just have to follow the child. It's not advisable to push a child, even adults, when an adult has undergone a stressful situation. You have to just listen and allow the person to talk when they feel ready and comfortable to talk. So we do the same with children. We just allow them time to talk. And sometimes it may take several weeks to be able to come to a conclusion of what exactly happened and how it happened. Or sometimes it may even take years. So we just follow the lead of the child and listen to the child. We don't press, we don't force a child to talk about something they are uncomfortable with.
Is that normally what happens in court? I mean, is there usually a professional like yourself there to ensure that a child is not pushed unduly? Or do they simply go, with their court timetable and bring the child up and ask them questions?
Well, I don't think that is usually the case. We don't have a professional in court usually. At the same time, the child is in court. So I haven't really been invited to support a child in court before. But I'm assuming that if the child is not able to talk, there's nothing they can do about it. If the child is in court and is unable to, so traumatized and is unable to talk, I don't think that they will continue. So we can write reports. So there are times that they send the children to us for assessment, and then we send the court reports. But to be in the courtroom at the same time with the child to support the child, I don't think it's something that is done often. It would be good for a psychologist or a psychiatrist or a mental health person to be there to support the child, but it's something that is often not looked at. The mental health aspect is usually not thought about most cases.
Right.
So, yes, until much later when the child starts having more serious psychological issues as a result of the abuse.
Right. Dr. Adam, stay with us. We're joined on the phone now by Dennis Ajejomo, who's a lawyer. Dennis, thanks for joining us.
Thanks.
Yeah, now I'm curious about a lot of the legal ramifications here, but I want us to start from where we kind of left off with Dr. Adam, in the courtroom, when children are called upon to recount some of their experiences. Because you obviously have been in courtrooms, perhaps you can explain to us how that process goes from the perspective of a child. How are they handled?
Okay, so first of all, we need to distinguish when the child is a victim and when the child is an accused person, which in terms of criminal, we refer to that child as a juvenile. Fortunately for us, in terms of the juvenile aspect, i.e. when the child is a suspect or becomes the accused person, there is a Juvenile Justice Act which governs the entire procedure of how to go about it. But when the child is a victim, many a time it often depends on the skill of the judge, which will seek to give a certain protection. So there's a lack of legal regime to take care of situations where the child is a victim.
Right.
And so when you look at the law technically treats the child in the face of it like a normal victim of a crime, being an adult or whoever you are. But however, by practice, many a time the judges have been trained to give special protection to these children who come to testify. However, the reality on the ground is that there's lack of social support for these children who happens to be victim of offenses. In other serious jurisdictions, they have Child Victims Act, which seeks to take care of situations where the children are involved. So I give a practical example. Where the child happens to be an accused, the law is specific that the trial of that child, who is a juvenile, must take place and finish within 6 months. The law allows under juvenile. However, when the child happens to be the victim, there is no mandatory requirement of the duration that the trial must take. And that's how come it's not surprising that case, because remember, that case will be made part of the usual criminal, offenses cases, and then it takes a longer time to deal with, and it goes through that. So we need to have a situation where we make that distinction. So in a typical fashion, it will still be the same. The accused person will come, he'll be charged, he'll be made to plead, and after plea, if he pleads not guilty, you go through the entire trial where the child will be made to mount the box. I must admit that in terms of court process, the child will not allow anybody to bully the child as compared. But remember that in court, it's about the evidence. It is not about the truth of the matter. So, and the standard of burden of proof in terms of all criminal offense, whether it involves a child or not, is beyond all reasonable doubt. So if the state is not able to prosecute and prove beyond all reasonable doubt that this child has truly been defiled, I'm sorry, the accused person will go home because you have not been able to prove your case. So I have insisted when we have these conversations that the focus of whenever children are involved, the focus has always been about how we punish the offender, how do we deal with it. The focus has not been on the victim, because when it's on the victim, it matters not whether or not the accused person is convicted. Okay, it's about the interest of the victim. The child has suffered psychology. How do we get, a psychological help for this child? The child cannot go to school. How do we take care of his educational rights, among others? In other jurisdictions, even before conviction is done, there are sometimes where the state, the judge will request by law, for a victim report, for us to know the impact of what has been done to the child before the judge even passes a sentence. But in terms of our regime, we have not gotten there yet. And so it's the law is there. However, the focus of the law is more of punishing the offender. It's less on the victim and how we can restore the victim to their previous circumstances when the incident happened.
Right. Now, for the purpose of our conversation, obviously we're talking about abused children, not just sexual abuse, but actually in particular children who are perhaps beaten beyond, anything that could even pass for discipline. Children who are injured by those who are supposed to look after them and protect them. Now, compared to other types of crimes, how difficult is it to get convictions for people who abuse and molest children? How difficult is it compared to other things like robbery and other types of crimes?
That's what I'm saying, that it's when it comes to criminal offense, it's difficult to get a conviction because the state has to put all the pieces of evidence together to prove their case beyond all reasonable doubt. Okay, so there will be certain challenges. The justice system sometimes being a little bit slow in terms of it, the pieces of evidence in terms of, and remember that most of these offenses that are reported up is quite gory, as has been done by your reporters, do not even happen in the cities. It happens in the villages and all these places. The act of getting this together, the act of testifying, even the stigmatization. Because remember that, any time a child goes to court, the child loses a day of his or her educational right. The mother or the person who is interested to work also loses economic right. So some of us have, in certain forums have prayed that in terms of children court, is it possible that we can look at a weekend so that the child does not, we don't have the issue of the parent? Because if I have to go, the state does not provide any transportation for me. The state does not give me any support when I'm going through this ordeal. Okay, so once I have little money, I have 2 Ghana cedi a day, you expect me to use that 2 Ghana, which I'm supposed to use to feed my children. I'm supposed to use it to take transport and come to court. And when I come to court, the system cannot inform me whether the case has been adjourned. I get there, the judge has been adjourned. So there are certain challenges in terms of prosecuting. The law is there. However, the act of motivating people to participate in the entire process sometimes is challenging and it's very frustrating for most children because, as I said, majority of people who are abused many a time are those people who are sometimes do not have the economic power. Okay, and they go into the process, which in itself is sometimes costly for them without the state support. So that's how come when you check the statistics of the police service, the numbers are, the defilement offenses that are reported, very few. But in terms of the reality, journalists are on the ground, they can tell you that they have a lot of feedback, but the statistics will show that there are less of them. So just to deal with the question, it is very difficult in terms of prosecuting because there is lack of support for victims and their parents when they are going through this process. And that's why we need to look at our social welfare system to say that in case somebody is going through this process, there is a special fund. Last year, we passed the Witness Protection and Victim Support Fund. How much money has gone into it? Last time I cross-checked, there's no money that has been dedicated to that fund. Okay, so when it comes to issues of children, we as a state do not take account of it. And I'll give you another example. In issues where we realize that cocaine and all those things were on the increase, narcotics on the increase, we passed a special act deciding that we will not grant bail to certain offenses. Okay? In issue that we felt that, election petition, we decided to have special dedicated course to take care of some of these things. Okay, so maybe it's time that we need to look at in terms of justice system, talk to the office of the Chief Justice and see whether we can have a practice direction before statute passes that where the victim happens to be a child, can we finish the trial within 6 months? Can we have a special dedication where, apart from that, can we notify that as part of the procedure, there should be a clinical psychologist mandated? And then the bigger question is that would there be enough clinical psychologists who would be willing to take these kids on? And we should check it. So there's a lack of, it's a gamut of inefficiency within our system that is coming to bear when the children are victims. But as I said, our focus is on the accused person. After this discussion, if the person is convicted, that's the end of the matter. What about the child who has lost the leg? What about these children? How are they going through the stigmatization? And if you live in certain communities, the idea that because of you, your father went to jail is a big issue. Okay, so that's why we think that we should not look at it from the social legal. If you're looking at the legal aspect, I think the legal framework can take care of it. But the social welfare system, how does it address this issue? And that's a bigger question. Let's look through the Appropriation Act. Through the kind of funding that we give to our social welfare system, it's negligible. You can't even use it for anything. So there's a time for us to call the Ministry of Finance, look through the Appropriation Act, how much has been dedicated towards it. Let's have a discussion with the Chief Justice. This trial has taken over 4 to 6 months. There is somewhere they have to have a criminal trial de novo. They shouldn't got a given direction that sometimes if the record is straight, the court can rely on it and proceed with the matter. So can we have a discussion with the Chief Justice Office say that when these matters come to you, can we have a practice direction that all trials involving children as victims must be dealt with within 6 months? But remember, are the police can they also put their investigation report and their caution statement together in such a way that when we go to court, the problem will not be coming from the police? Because when it comes to children, they are special individuals. We need to train our prosecutors who handle children matters to have the requisite skill and expertise to deal with it. So when we do that, the trial is not going to have any effect. I'm telling you.
Right.
We will come back and be discussing this issue. And I will say that we are not going to have any impact on these things. Let's look to appropriation. Let's check our social welfare system. And we can use one of these cases as a test case. Okay? The GES, what is the regulation that GES has put in place that if you go to this school and it's stop of victimization or stop a stigma, we can easily change your school for you. Okay? And these are the discussions we have. Our discussion is too much focused on the offenders, the father and the mother. But our discussion is about, we just see the kid and say that, oh, this kid has suffered abuse. And after abuse, what next? Do we have the system, the social welfare system? In other jurisdictions, when you are not able to take care of your child, the state will take your child from you. In our jurisdiction, let's go to our home. Most of these children's homes are operating out of the benevolence of the people. How much is the state, have dedicated towards social welfare? Let's be real. And when you look through the Arbitration Act, because let's spend time through the Arbitration, when we are just looking at funding for social welfare, we shouldn't look to anywhere. I think when we have the entire discussion, we are looking at roads, we are looking at this infrastructure, but the value system. So this child that has been abused cannot do anything. So if we decide to look to arbitration, it's negligible. The state does not take care of these issues. The state is more concerned about infrastructure. Let me build roads for people. Let me build these things. But in terms of our welfare system for children, the state does not care, respectfully, in terms of how much the state has made a dedication. I know the Ministry of Gender is making effort, but we all have to help the Ministry of Gender to say that when it comes to children, we are saying that the amount that is dedicated should be high. Is it possible we can have a discussion with the Office of the First Lady, the Office of the Second Lady, and have a discussion of it? Another example, when you look at the Juvenile Justice Act, it mandates every district to have a child panel. As we speak, there is no child panel in Ghana. As we speak, they have abandoned the child panel system, and all children are made to go to the criminal system. You can't even divert the children from there. As we speak, if you look at the Children's Act, the District Assembly has a special position under the law mandated to ensure protection of children. Go to the various, we have created new districts. Do they have the infrastructure to do some of these things? The answer is no. So I understand the position that we are trying to have the person being convicted, we are all disgusted, he should be arrested. Because remember, when the man is put in prison, all of us are going to feel that man. But all of us do not feed the child who's on the street. What kind of justice system are we operating? Where the one who causes the crime beats the child and is convicted, or abuser is convicted, we contribute to feeding in prison. But the state, the child who has suffered the abuse, there is no system that gives this child 10 Ghana cedi a day as compared to the offender or the convict, in which we are giving 10 Ghana cedi a day by our budget.
It's actually quite obscene when you point it out in such a way, Dennis, and you're absolutely right. But what is the way forward? I mean, what would be your recommendations, Dennis, if we were to fix some of these anomalies?
Okay, but my first recommendation would be in terms of short term, which is can easily be done by administrative, is to see how best we can have a conversation with the Office of the Chief Justice to bring out a practice direction before any law is passed. And the law allows the Chief Justice Office to do that, to maybe give a practice direction that where the victim involved is a child, we should finish the entire trial within 6 months, and which then mandates them, because when the child is the offender, which is the juvenile, the law mandates it to be done within 6 months. So we are just saying that the Chief Justice can help us come up with a practice direction that where the child is a victim, it should finish within 6 months. Secondly, last year, under the Witness Protection Act, we established the Victim and Witness Protection Act, which allows a fund, which allows for victims and witness people who qualify under the fund to be given support. The fund is already established. Can we have a conversation with the Office of the Ministry of Finance to provide funds for that victim so that we can get some of these results, so that when there's a child involved who happens to be the victim, we can provide him or the family with some basic stipends in which they can use to take care of the child as they go through trial or they go through that phase of it. Then most importantly, can we engage the traditional authorities? Because those people are more committed in terms of spirituality, in terms of their mandate, in terms of the stool that they are sit on, to the protection of their people. But we always leave them out in this conversation. Can we have a conversation with the Queen Mothers? Can we have a conversation with the chiefs, the National House of Chiefs, so that they can be mandated to ensure? And fourthly, can we have a discussion with the district? Because the district assembly is mandated by law. Can we let every district produce its policy or its directives when it comes to protection of children within their district? I think that we can put these things in there. And in the long term, before every appropriation act, and because you are in Parliament where the Ministry of Finance read these budgets all the time, can you ask a very simple question? How much have they dedicated towards social welfare in respect of children? Let's just look at the appropriation act. And so we need to look at the appropriation act so that we can ask these questions. If we don't take care, always the infrastructure will precede us, and we'll leave a discussion of these things. So we go, and it's very easy. And if you want, I can send you copies of the appropriation act. You can look at these things, and you will see that there's less funding when it comes to children matters in this country. And all of us have to help in that direction.
Absolutely. Thank you. Thank you for these recommendations. Let's wrap up with Dr. Selassie Adum as well, again with recommendations from your professional perspective. What are some of the things you want to see done to ensure that children are better protected, and that in the unfortunate event of them being abused, that they have better care and better rehabilitation and protection?
Hello?
Yes, Doctor, did you hear the question?
Can you please repeat the question?
Certainly. I'm asking for your recommendations. What would you like to see going forward to ensure that children are better protected, and also that in the unfortunate event of any child being abused, that they are actually better rehabilitated and taken care of?
Yes, so I think that the most important thing is to recognize the abuse early. So for some of them, like the young boy who was abused, beaten by the father very badly, so easy to spot. But there are some that are less obvious and may be very difficult to see. So all of us must make it our responsibility to be on the lookout for such children. When you see a child who used to be very bubbly and outgoing and cheerful and is suddenly looking quiet and withdrawn, it should raise some questions. So all of us who interact with children must be on high alert and recognize it early so that we can start intervention early. And my colleague, the lawyer, has said a lot of things about how we can make sure that the victim is supported. So he said it rightly that most of the time we focus so much on the person who committed the crime and we forget about the victim. And once most of them don't even go to court, and even when they go to court, once the process is over, the child is left alone. So it would be good to have some mental health support for the child, and that may take a long time and prevent long-term mental health problems. A lot of children don't go through the process, so they grow up and they will be having major mental health problems, and then we'll have to now look back and ask questions, and that is when we would see that they had some of these problems. And then the other thing is that children who are abused can become abusers themselves. So if we don't put in interventions in place, then the cycle just continues. So when they become adults, they will also abuse children. That's just how it is, because that's what they know. It's what they have grown up knowing, seeing and knowing. So if we don't intervene, then that means that the child may also grow up abusing other children or abusing their spouses.
Right.
Yeah.
We certainly can't have that. I want to say a big thank you to you, Dr. Adum, and Lawyer Jomo, for your time with us and the education you've shared. We appreciate you both very much. Dr. Selassie Adum is a psychiatrist, a child and adolescent mental health specialist at Pantang Hospital. Dennis Ajay Jomo is a lawyer, and they've certainly raised some important issues here. And they say that the quality of a society can be measured by how they treat their most vulnerable, and there is no group in society more vulnerable than children.
Exactly.
But it seems as if in this country we prioritize far too many things over children. And I can list them, so many things that we prioritize over children. We spend more money on V8s than we spend on children. We spend more money on travel of government officials than we spend on children. We spend more money on edifices, whether it's cathedrals or whatever, than we spend on children. How are we, what is the message we are sending to the world when we demonstrate that there are so many things that we consider far more important than children, including funerals?
Well, you've raised a very important point. And, Dennis was talking about looking at Appropriation Act, because for him the most important thing is that if you want to know how much government is spending, one of the things you'd have to look out for is the Appropriation Act. And I have in front of me here the Appropriation Act for 2020, and I'm going to go into the part that talks about women, gender, children, and social protection. Sometimes. So, if you look at it carefully, here it talks about social development. So they have a budget of about 34 million. 34 million. Okay, that's a budget that was made available for them. Okay, so that's for compensation of employees. But let's look at other things. If I look at that of children, Kojo, I'm looking at it clearly, and I don't really see a lot of anything here for children under ed. I'm still going through it.
Go through that. Sure. See if you can find any actual numbers that we can assign to this, and perhaps we can compare it to how much the government spends on vehicles. Or how much we're spending on the cathedral, because the government is spending some money on it in addition to what is being raised, aren't they? Or perhaps what we spend on travel of government officials, what's that? What was the name that they use for entertaining, and events and sword cutting alone?
Okay,
in this country.
I have seen child's rights, promotion, protection, and development, and a total of 4,379,382
for the whole year.
For the whole year of 2020,
4 million.
4 million was made available for child's right, promotion, and protection. That's how much has been made available.
Ghana cedis.
Ghana cedis, yes. And it actually includes compensation, as in payment of employees who work within that sector. And that would take 2.6 million. And the provision of goods and services would also take 500,000.
So that's 3.1.
3.1. And the rest is left for
children, for the shelters that they'll need, for the support that they'll need, the psychological and psychiatric help that they'll need, the reintegration, all of that is
Yes.
actually the minority. It's like
Exactly.
the left, what's left of the money.
Yes.
Right. Okay.
So we can spend money on virtually, every project. If you are building 4 kilometers of road somewhere in this country, a V8 will be bought for someone to ride in to go and supervise the 4 kilometers. This is what we do in this country. So we can buy all these cars, but we can't pay to protect our children. 4 million for the whole year.
Yes.
Oh.
That's according to the Appropriation Act, approved by Parliament.
Oh.
This is what gives government the right to spend.
Oh.
And this is allocation. It is not actually disbursement.
So the disbursement will be even less.
Based on
I've never heard of disbursement being more than
based on my experience as a parliamentary correspondent, whenever the MDAs come to Parliament, for the appropriation of a year's expenditure, they always make reference to how the previous year's expenditure, even though a lot was allocated, the disbursements were less. So it is true, they're always less.
So we're growing children who will end up being bullies, who will end up abusing others, who will end up, living miserable lives and causing harm to others. We're building a society of mutilated minds because we think children are not important.
I don't understand it, could you?
Anyway, we've got more to talk about on the show. I just want this to percolate in our minds for a bit. We'll be back after these.